The Seahawks bounced back with a thrilling victory over the 49ers, getting themselves back to 500 after a rocky few weeks in Seattle. It was all part of a wild weekend in the NFL, and ESPN's Ben Solak is here to break it down with us. Let's light him up. I'm Jacson Bevins, and this is Cigar Thoughts. Welcome back to the Cigar Lounge. I am Jacson Bevins, and along with my pertinacious producer, Mike Barwin, this is the Cigar Thoughts podcast. And baby, we might be back. I'll be honest, I'm not entirely sure what to make of the Seahawks through 10 games, which is why I'm stoked to have Ben Solak helping me dig in today. But before we do, Cigar Thoughts is proud to be sponsored by Seattle Cigar Concierge and Glenfiddich Single Malt Scotch Whiskey, two companies whose products I enjoy on a regular basis. And look, by now you know the deal. The Cigar Thoughts cigars are fantastic, and it's not just me saying so. The feedback has been awesome, and you can get your own bundle of 10 for just $149 using the link on the show page or going to cigarthoughtsnfl.com. And with the holidays coming up, they make a great gift for the stogie lover in your life. Mike and I love doing this show, and there are two ways y'all listening and watching can help support it so that we can keep the episodes coming. One is by purchasing the cigars, and the other is by subscribing to our YouTube channel at Cigar Thoughts, where you can watch full episodes as well as the funny and insightful clips that Mike puts together. Give a thumbs up to the stuff you like, and let us know what you think in the comments. And of course, you can listen to us everywhere you get your podcasts. Now, every time it looks like the NFC West is finally settling down, someone comes along and overturns the apple cart. This week it was the Seahawks, who despite losing their last 6 games to the 49ers and 5 of their last 6 overall, beat San Francisco to bring everyone back within a game of each other. The win also resuscitated vibes that had gotten pretty raspy in Seattle recently, moving them to 500 and keeping the playoffs within reach. It was all part of a wild weekend in the NFL, and I am thrilled to be joined by one of the brightest minds covering it. He does exquisite work as an NFL analyst for ESPN after successful ventures with The Ringer and the Draft Network, and he is back in the Cigar Lounge with us today. He is Ben Solak. Ben, thanks for coming in.
Thank you, Jacson. It was a very, very nice intro. I was feeling the emotions of it. It was good stuff.
Well, man, it was an emotional weekend for Seahawks fans, and I think just football fans in general. This was a weekend with real haves versus haves and have-nots versus have-nots. You had a lot of bad teams playing each other and a lot of good teams playing each other. And it led to a lot of really interesting football. And there's no doubt, and I'm not just saying this as someone who pays more attention to the Seahawks than anything else. I really thought the Seahawks 49ers was one of the most compelling games of the weekend. Oh,
no, for sure. And I think that for a lot of people, that's on the 49ers side of things because second game back with Christian McCaffrey, this offense hasn't been what we've expected it to be. Okay, there's no George Kittle in this game. They're still in the post-Brandon Ayuk figuring all that stuff. Like San Francisco's obviously got a lot of national interest and then a lot of moving parts going on in their offense. But I'm still a believer in Seattle generally. And so I was picking them to win this game. I thought they'd be strong out of the bye. I think that they match up better into San Francisco than they have in the past, and a lot of people give them credit for. And here they are now at 5-5 with, season-defining games against the Cardinals upcoming, right? The path is clear, even if the path to this point has been a little circuitous.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, I'm super interested in the fact that you chose Seattle, and I don't know how much of kind of the tumult of the last couple of weeks in Seattle has made it out nationally, but you had them letting go of their leading tackler in Tyrell Dodson. And he, when he signed with Miami and was asked about it, he said he was pissed and he's going to be pissed about it and the way it happened for the rest of his career. We haven't gotten any details. Jaron Reed was asked about it. He's like, I know it's a business, but I've never seen it go down like that. That was followed by the surprise retirement of Connor Williams, who they just brought in as a free agent and has had a very up and down season. You combine all of that with losing 5 out of 6, going into a road game against a team that's whooped your ass for 3 straight seasons. And it was harder, I think, maybe because I was just too close to it. I thought they were going to be competitive. I remember texting Mina and Danny to be like, I think this at least comes down to the last drive, and this is the first time I felt that way. But I did not feel like the Seahawks were going to win this game. What was giving you the feeling that it could happen?
Well, the offense is good. It's good offense. It's not a perfect offense. There's college problems with it. They got line issues, whatever. But like every metric you look at is like, all right, like Geno's a top 10 quarterback by success rate. Okay, they do all this like true drop back stuff. When DK's in the lineup, they're good against man coverage. With Jacson Smith-Njigba, they're good against zone coverage. They're good with the throws behind and at the line of scrimmage, right? AJ Barner's been a guy for them. Kenneth Walker receiving's been good for them. Like they got weapons. They can drop back. They can throw it. Can they? The running game, a little bit shaky. Do you wish you had a better play action game? Sure. Anytime the drop back is longer than 3 seconds, is there a problem? Yes, but like. Every offense in the league has got 6 different problems, right? It's do you have one mode in which you can move the football that you can rely on, and they do, and that's Geno Smith dropping back and go and spread and shred. That's what he does very, very well. That's something that the Niners are not too great at defending this year because their entire pass rush is funneled through Nick Bosa. If you solve the Bosa problem, you can hang in that pocket for long enough. And then secondary-wise, they've been a little bit banged up at the safety, and Charvarius Ward was going to miss this game. So, all right, like they should have the advantage when they drop back. If Seattle were to finish drives like a normal team in any stretch this season, they would look really, really competitive in terms of like our general metrics, like, points per drive and like, wins and stuff like that. With advanced metrics, which kind of ignore the fact that, okay, you got like bad snaps on 2nd and goal and you're missing on all these 4th and 1s and whatever. On those advanced metrics that kind of are agnostic of the result. Yeah, like this offense looks pretty good. And so they have the ability to score with anyone. It just never looks like it because at least twice per game, and they did it in this game too, they have a failed and one conversion attempt, right? 4th and 1, 4th and 2. And they have a bad snap that kills the drive. They usually also have a bad turnover as well. This time it was in their half, not the other half. But still, like, it doesn't look at it on box scores. But if you look at it from advanced metrics, like they can score with anybody. So why shouldn't they be in it with the Niners defense that's not that great?
Yeah, and that's just it, right? I mean, I think with the Niners, and we'll talk about them more here in a minute, is it does feel like a team that is trading in on reputation a little bit.
100%.
More so than what actual on-field performance this year has been. I'm glad you started with the offense because that has carried this team, and it's had to carry the team the last few years, whereas Pete Carroll, who of course built his reputation as a defensive guru, he saw the petals fall off of that rose the last few years in the NFL. And that was all supposed to change with Mike Macdonald. And yet the defense has continued to struggle once they started playing starting quarterbacks. And, it's been the offense that's had to carry them. But in the last 2 games, it does feel like there's been a coming together with this defense. And maybe it coincides with the loss of Dodson and Baker, the decision to move on from them. I think bringing in Ernest Jones might be the move of the season. Reminds me in a lot of ways of them going out and getting Quandre Diggs midseason a few years ago to solidify things. But Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan have destroyed this defense for the last half decade. And now in back-to-back games, they have held both teams under 5 yards per play. Is this just kind of 2 random data points, or are you starting to see some real progression with this defense?
No, this is why you hired Mike. Like the long and the short of it is when you hired Mike Macdonald, you were looking at that Ravens game against the Niners in 23, and you were basically saying, hey, like even the game you played against the Rams, which that was a close game in 23 against the Ravens, but still like they had some good defensive success. Stafford had some big plays. You're saying, all right, this is the sort of guy who we think can handle this division, right? Because when you go to a higher, like I think fans generally underestimate this, how much a team indexes for their division when they make personnel moves, right? Like when ownership sits down, the first thing they do is they go, okay, we need to find somebody who can beat the Niners, the Rams, and the Cardinals. Like that is where you start on the list. Like, oh, cool offense, develop Geno. No, like we got to beat those. We know we're going to see each of those teams twice a year. We have to be able to beat those teams. So when you bring in Mike, you're bringing in McDonald with the intention of being good against those groups. That's what he's spending a lot of time film prep wise. It's what when he's installing base concepts in the defense in August, he's thinking about how they're going to match up against the 49ers when they play them in November, right? Like it is in the DNA of the Seahawks to match up into those teams. Now, Seattle's defense is far from what they wanted it to be, and the linebacker play has been the big issue, right? You don't have Tyrell Dodson taking 100% of the snaps in 6 consecutive weeks and then going straight cut without there being, pretty substantial issues in the linebacker play. And so that's muddled some of their performance, right? That stretch where the entire defensive line was hurt muddled some of their performance as well. But this team against the run is fairly solid. They're particularly it's funny numbers wise and film wise, they're like not good against outside zone, but they were much better in this game than they have been over the course of the season. So maybe that's just noise, who knows? But anyway, run defense wise, they're pretty good. pass defense wise, if they know a drop back is coming, if they are in like clear third and long, if they're in clear drop back, they're great. Like they have some of the best numbers in the league, right? The play action splits is the issue right now for Seattle.
Yes.
The opposing quarterbacks are averaging 0.35 EPA per drop back with a play action fake. It's one of the highest numbers in football. I think it's top 2 now after week 11. Without a play action fake, it's negative 0.06, like a top 5 number, right? Success rate is an increase of over 10 percentage points when there's a play action fake when there isn't. It's because the line, they don't trust their backers, right? Like the whole point of play action is they're going to put the backers in conflicts, and they just having a good backer play. So they've got issues. They have personnel problems to figure out. But this defense, if they can get to a third and long, they can get off the field. It's when they run into these offenses that are really heavy play action offenses that they struggle. Oh, well, that's usually San Francisco. Oh, it's usually the Rams. Not anymore. Not since Stafford and Purdy. Like those teams have been moving away from play action. And so they match up better into the Niners and the Rams, people realize, because the Niners and the Rams aren't nearly play action teams the way they used to be.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they used to. It's funny. I always used to say when McVay would play the Seahawks, he'd only use a third of the playbook. It was just play action and sail routes. And then you run to the outside, and it was like those 2-3 things was just enough to put Seattle in hell every single time. And, the hope was that was going to change. And then, that first game against the 49ers, they were completely toothless on that Thursday night game. So to head into the bye with a solid defensive performance where they held the Rams offense in regulation to 13 points, and then to hold the 49ers to 17. And yes, they were without George Kittle, but they still, McCaffrey's not all the way back, but I think Brock Purdy's been so good this year, and they still had Trent Williams, and it's still Kyle Shanahan, and they just looked ready. It was the first time in a long time for me that this defense looked ready against a good offense. So I thought that was really encouraging. And the Seahawks season is just a reminder, like it is for so many teams, that unless you're all the way up here or all the way down here in terms of talent in the league, so much of your season is going to come down to 1 or 2 plays, 1 or 2 drives at the end of the game. And it was so cool to see Seattle have their backs against the wall on the road against a team they can't beat, and to see them come through the way they did.
Yeah. And also for a lot of teams, when you are as new as Seattle is, right? New head coach, new offensive coordinator, new defensive system, new offensive system. You expect to be much better in week 11 than you were in week 1, much better in week 12 than you are in week 2. Like that's it. Think about how Kenneth Walker's been used in the passing game, right? Like they came into camp saying we really want to do this, and then the first couple weeks of the season they weren't like super getting it done, and then weeks like 4 and 5 hit like with 9 targets a game or something. Like we got to make sure we get this part of the offense, and now it's like scaled down a little bit. You figure stuff out as you go, right? Like it'd be great if you could install everything in camp, but you can't. Even on the old rules, like we have 10,000 practices, 4 preseason weeks. Nobody got it done, right? You were still figuring stuff out as a first-time staff as you went on, especially Ryan Grubb, like never being in the NFL before. So the Seahawks were always going to get better week over week. So again, I think the defensive line injuries made things a little bit muddy for the defense early, but this defense is a fine defense. I don't think it's going to win you games, top 10 unit all the time, but this is a fine defense when it's healthy. And I think offensively, like you're seeing, again, like talked about Kenneth Walker early, now it's the JSN thing, right? Where JSN started to have some good moments without DK and now some good games with DK in there. It's like, all right, like this team's going to continue learning and learning. Are they going to get a week 19, a week 20? They're going to get some January games to play? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. NFC is tight. NFC West is confusing, whatever. But if they're continuing to improve, if they're on an arc, like, yeah, that's what you should have expected from the Seahawks in 24.
Yeah, and it's something where, I've people listen to the show, they hear me say this every week, but it really is an anchor point for me. And I say it over and over again as much to remind myself as I am to anyone paying attention to this show. But 2024 was always, to me, a diagnostic year for the Seahawks. It was not, yes, obviously you're going to try and win. You're going to try and win your division. You're going to try and win playoff games. But to your point, this is Mike Macdonald doing this at this level for the first time as head coach. This is Ryan Grubb's first time in the NFL. This is Aiden Dirda's first time as a coordinator. You've got, even though you had some continuity with the roster, they're all learning a new language, and they're all learning how to do the non-Sunday stuff at these new roles. And it is going to take time. And it's easy to forget that Pete Carroll only won 7 games his first season in Seattle. They just happened to win the division with 7 games that year and get the Beastquake moment that kind of like cemented some momentum. But they came back in 2011 and they only won 7 games and missed the playoffs that year too. Mm-hmm. It takes some time for this to get together. And I think we all got suckered in by a 3-0 start to adjust our expectations. And all of a sudden, Like if you had told me the Seahawks were going to be 4-5 going into the 49ers game before the season, I would have said, yeah, that feels about right. But not after 3-0.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the perspective is so important to keep in mind. And you mentioned JSN, anyone who has read, listened to, or watched your stuff understands how well you're able to identify what's happening on the field and make it easy to understand for, some of us more average fans. But where I think you really shine is in your draft coverage and your ability to identify what may or may not make a collegiate prospect successful. With Jacson Smith-Njigba, he was a player I was very high on. Clearly, the NFL was high on him as well. First wide receiver off the board. Now at 290 yards in his last 2 games, one with DK and one without. Is the NFL version of JSN starting to match what you anticipated from watching his college version?
Yeah, ask me in like a month. Let's see a little more.
Sure.
Right. I think that the last 2 games is the best 2-game stretch of JSN's career. Right. It's when I was 3rd and 4th or 4th and 5th 100-yard games consecutively. This has been the level of volume that he's been able to sustain, and especially against some of these 2-minute drills and when they've been trailing and when they've needed quick scores. Like obviously, I think the box scores are a little bit chunkier, a little bit fatter than the actual play would imply. He's never going to be the primary target getter when DK's on the field, just with how much Geno kind of silos on DK and trusts him against single coverage. But the fact that JSN has been able to respond with that volume, right? 13 targets against the Rams and then 11 against the Niners, is a very, very big deal, right? We underestimate how difficult it is for receivers to be high volume receivers.
Yes.
And when you have I think JSN got what picks 20 overall. JSN was, and then
21,
21, right? 20 is Zay Flowers, right? 22 is Quentin Johnston. Like you've seen those guys be valuable for their teams, but
you were right. He was 20, and then it was
a world where
Quentin
Zay Flowers gets 11 targets. Like that's just not the sort of player he can be. JSN is big enough. He is reliable enough. He can take enough hits. He can run enough. His conditioning is good enough. He's versatile enough that he actually can get that sort of a usage. Now the Seahawks are a very heavy drop back team, and there's again the box is a little bit chunkier than you'd think. But so firstly, him being able to take that volume is a big deal. He's doing a little bit more out wide, which is nice. I think that the frustrating thing with JSN through the first season and a half of his career has been that it's been a clear slot usage for him, but then it's been a really low ADOT from the slot, right? Like he just does not get downfield production.
Which isn't who he was in college. That was not the player that you saw at Ohio State. And just
in the NFL now, we're getting so much better at putting receivers in the slot who can still operate downfield, right? It's not that, our slot receivers are better at going downfield. It's that, now we stick our Jamar Chases there and we stick our Justin Jeffersons there. We were already going to go downfield with them, but now we're using this spot for that. And being able to access that, I think, is really important for the Seahawks to make JSN take that leap. And you still aren't super seeing that in the last couple of weeks. There's been flashes of it, but that's the thing that has to kind of keep going. And so he's on a great arc. He's got way more of Geno's trust than he ever has previously. And he's definitely getting more downfield routes and more downfield-ish targets, but it's more like 10 to 20 stuff. And you'd really like to be able to get even more vertical than that. So on the right arc, but let's see this train keep going.
Yeah, one of my predictions for this season was that we would see a pretty even target distribution between him and Tyler Lockett up until the bye week. And then my expectation was coming out of the bye, we were going to see that ramp up. We've seen the ramp up start even a little earlier than I thought. And I think Tyler Lockett's still a very valuable and useful player. But he doesn't have the juice anymore that JSN does. And look, he's very unapologetic about not trying to be a yak guy anymore. He's got health preservation in mind when he catches that football, and that's fine. That said, that displacement of targets from Lockett to JSN doesn't just happen because Tyler Lockett's getting older. Those targets still need to be taken away from him by talent and by trust. And I think that's the most encouraging thing. I'm not crowning JSN as, the hands down best receiver of that class or going to be a top 12 guy in the NFL anytime soon necessarily. But if he is going to reach that promise, these are the types of games you need to see.
Yeah. And also Geno, whom I love dearly, if he doesn't like you, he will not throw the football at you, right? He'll look at you and then throw to DK. And so I think it is there were games last year where JSN was kind of, you could tell, a little bit mentally disengaged with his role in the offense and how the passing game worked. But then he would get a route that he was excited on, and Geno would look at him, and Geno didn't super love throwing him the football, and JSN had a couple of drops, and again, there was some effort stuff going on with JSN, and Geno would just not not deliver it. The fact that Geno now is like, all right, like I will. There's still not a lot of contested catch. There's still not a lot of like, oh, you're going to win your one-on-one. He had a vertical route. Jacson did on. I want to say it was a sack for Geno there. It was in the second half. I can't remember if it was the last driver before it, but he had a win on a vertical route, and Geno looked at him and should have taken it and didn't. I'm like, all right, there's still a little bit more like, okay, he's going to win his one-on-ones. You got to put the ball up in the air for him. So there's still a little bit more to get there. But in general, Geno trusts JSN a lot more. And you're right, that's earned. That's not default to like, oh, Tyler Lockett's old, so now I like throwing to JSN. No, JSN earned that. He worked for that, and it's kudos to him.
Yeah, I mean, for the last, ever since Geno's become the starter, and there's been like a combined almost 50% target share between DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. Like Geno wasn't going to fuck around with guys that he didn't trust to be where they needed to be quickly, because with his offensive line, you got to get there quickly, right? This isn't a Stephon Diggs who I love and think is awesome. So many of like the Stephon Diggs highlights are 4 seconds of him juking around and then losing a guy. You can't do that in Seattle. You got to win early, and we're starting to see that. And to your point about trust, on that final drive, which I think was the drive of Geno's career, and maybe to someone who doesn't pay a lot of attention to the Seahawks, that doesn't sound like a great statement, but since he became the starter, he's got more game-winning drives in the fourth quarter and overtime than any other quarterback in the NFL. So decent sample size. And I thought that was the best drive of his career. And on it, he went 7 for 8. 4 of them went to Jacson, Smith-Njigba. Game on the line, defense keying on DK. I'm going to trust this guy to give us a chance to win. And I think that was as encouraging as anything else I saw.
Yeah, and listen, when you're going to get a team that's playing soft zone and just doesn't want to give up a score fast, as the Niners will, then that's going to be where JSN is going to eat. It's going to equal hits, and he's going to equal, like, you got to be able to make catches. You got to be able to reliably get forward. I will say, when JSN didn't go out of bounds on the catch before the scramble, I wanted to clock him. I was like, Jacson, please. Like, we got to know our situations. All right, good situation.
It was a low moment. Yeah.
Other than that, he was nails on that drive. He really was.
Yeah, it was a low moment for Team Jacson. I'm sure Mike is reveling in that. But and kudos to Geno for just letting his nuts hang, not only on that final drive, but on that final play. If he gets tackled, they lose that game. Like, they're in field goal range. They at the very least can tie this. Just don't mess it up. He saw a window, and when you see it from behind the quarterback, that's all instinct, because it was not wide open. But he saw that defenders were starting to turn their heads, and he didn't hesitate, and he went. And I thought there was so much gumption in that play, and kind of defines a quarterback who is consistently outplaying his expectations. So yeah, needless to say, vibes are obviously much better in Seattle after this week than they've been the last couple of months. And like I mentioned earlier, it has really muddied what I think is probably one of the 2 most interesting divisions, along with the NFC North, in the NFL this year. So talk to me about the NFC West. What has surprised you the most now that we're a little over halfway through the season? You got the Cardinals at first place at 6-4, and the other 3 teams at 5-5.
Cardinals are most surprising to me. I thought this was going to be a step back here for the Niners, pretty much inevitably, just in terms of the Super Bowl hangover, how banged up that offense was. They've got a lot of guys who are injury prone, and they played such a long season. I thought that offensive line, they got away with a lot last year. I didn't think they were going to be able to do it as easily this year. Defensively, coming into the season without Dre was a big deal. They had some change along the defensive line. So I thought the Niners were going to take a step back. And then the Rams, I thought were going to be like really good on offense and really bad on defense. It turns out that they're better on defense than I expected, but worse on offense. Kind of the scales balanced. I was preseason, I bet on the Seahawks to win the division and the Cardinals to win the division, just as pure fades of the Niners and the Rams. So obviously we're here now, and everyone's 5-5, and I'm like, I'm still going to find a way to lose these bets. But the Cardinals bet was just like, all right, like in case everything hits the fan and somebody wins this thing at 9-8, like in case everybody's really bad, I still just don't think the Niners and the Rams are going to be able to pull this together. The Cardinals to look very competent is a surprise, and I think that they're a kind of a good look at what. If you want to know what year 2 with Mike might look like, and with Grubb might look like, you go and you look at John Gannon, you look at Drew Petzing, and you say, okay, they didn't have all the tools necessary to solve the problems last year, but you started there was that game they won against the Eagles last year where everybody's like, oh my gosh, this running game is so cool. And it was a portent of things to come, right? It was foreshadowing. They just do a lot of creative stuff offensively, and they do a lot of creative stuff defensively. The Cardinals are a team that you have to coach to. They make you coach to beat them. You have to adjust things. You have to come in with a different game plan. You have to be willing to deal with their wonky stuff. If you walk in like a team like the Jets did, where the Jets like, oh, we just run our offense, like they burn you. You have to be they're flexible. They make you beat them for 4 quarters because they're creative. I have a lot of respect for that. Kyler's played really well. Trey McBride's played really well. That line's been a lot better than I thought it would be. So the Cardinals are like actual for real good. I don't know if I don't think they're like NFC playoff run good, but they're like, we can deservedly win this division with double-digit season total. And I think that was on the high end of my expectations for their outcome coming into the season.
Which is a scary thought for the rest of the division because they're young and they still have a big old booty full of draft picks.
A lot,
and they've drafted well with those picks recently. And I'm, I get shit for this from Seahawks fans all the time. I'm like a pretty staunch Kyler supporter. Mm-hmm. It's always hard to judge things like leadership and when you're not in the locker room and seeing practice habits and all that stuff. But when it comes to just talent, Kyler just seems like the kid who can do anything he tries. And that's been clear throughout his athletic career. And this feels like the first time that he's been in a really stable situation in the NFL. And man, when he's good, he is really, really good. Surrounded by a lot of young talent. The coaching appears to be excellent. I don't know, as you're a famous Eagles supporter. I don't know what your opinion of Jonathan Gannon was when he was in Philly. He definitely had kind of a comical start to his career in terms of, the PR stuff. He's got them boys playing hard, man. And they played hard last year. Yeah,
Gannon's an interesting cat because he was like a fast riser in the ranks. And so we didn't have a lot of time to figure out who are you as a guy? Like, what do you know? He was like a assistant defensive backs coach for Mike Zimmer. I was like, okay, so are you a Zimmer dude? And he's never been a Zimmer guy, right? With all cover 2 and then these bug fronts. It took us a while to figure out what he was. And the job before he had the Eagles job was with the Colts and it was with Matt Eberflus on that Colts defense when Eberflus was the DC there. And it's clear that that's kind of the DNA that he goes off of, right? Eberflus is we play our stuff, but we are super fast to the football and we tackle and we have hustle and we create turnovers. It's like a very an effort defense. It's a philosophy defense. It's a culture defense. If you don't buy into this, you won't play. And so the thing about the Cardinals defense is they've got Budda Baker and there's not a ton of big names on there. The corner Garrett Williams has played well this year. Zayvon Collins has played well this year, but they don't have a lot of big names. They're just really fundamentally good, right? They don't give up stupid missed tackles and they don't commit a ton of penalties. And they put a blanket on top of you. They put a roof on top of you. They make you execute in the red zone. And when you don't, they force you to kick field goals. This is a good execution team defensively. Now, when he was the DC of the Eagles, they weren't doing all this creative fronts, all these weird blitzes and stuff. They were just running 4 down and drop 7s. They had such a huge amount of talent, right? And so
I was gonna say that's coaching to your roster a little bit.
Yeah, right, exactly. And so they lose that Super Bowl to the Chiefs, the Eagles do, and everybody's like, why didn't John Gannon blitz? Why didn't he come out and do anything? And it's because philosophically he was like, well, I think my 11 are better than your 11, and that had worked for the Eagles all the way to the Super Bowl and run into a problem when you hit 15 in the Chiefs. Now in Arizona, you don't think your 11 is better than their 11, so you got to throw some stuff at the wall and see what sticks. And that's why I say you have to out-coach the Cardinals. They make you coach for 4 quarters because they do the right things for their personnel. They do the things that are wrong for your personnel, right? They don't walk in there, this is my way or the highway. No, they're flexible. And that's a kudos to Gannon because it's on the offensive and defensive side of the ball. It's very clearly top down. It's very clearly intentional. That's good coaching, long and the short of it.
Yeah, one of my core beliefs in being a fan of and trying to analyze football is that the NFL is the fastest learning organism on planet Earth. And if you can't adapt, you can't survive. And it's really cool when a coach is able to say, okay, you know what? I'm used to square pegs with square holes. Now I have round holes. What can I do to make this work? And I think we're seeing that in Arizona. We've talked a lot about the Seahawks, a little bit about the 49ers. I do want to get your thoughts on the Rams and the Niners. Not so much. I mean, yes, please give me your thoughts regarding the rest of this season. But from a more holistic perspective, Seahawks and Cardinals fans have been waiting for these juggernaut rosters to just finally reach the end of the road and have to go through some sort of rebuild. Given what you know about roster age, solidity at the coaching staff, contract situations, cap space, all of that stuff. Are either of these teams in trouble, or are they in a position where they can start to pivot and still remain competitive?
The Rams are in some trouble because Stafford is 36 and Cobb is 31. And like, it was 2022 when Stafford was like, McVay was like, I might retire because Stafford's elbow might not keep working. Right. Like there's like, at no point tomorrow, 3 months from now, a year from now, could a McVay is retiring report drop that would like shock me. Right? I'm sure like it would surprise me if they like mid-season, whatever. But I would not be stunned at any point. Right? He definitely likes doing the media thing, and he's working a lot on his work-life balance. Like he does not seem like the sort of guy who's just going to like live and die 20 years at the mast as the head coach of the Los Angeles Rams. Stafford is like tough as all get out, right? Like, I mean, like Stafford's the sort of guy who I think is going to
played his whole career with a broken back, man.
Yeah, I think he's going to want to 20 years at the mast and die on the job. The thing is, like he is 36. He takes a lot of hits because he plays in the pocket, and his body has been going for a while. And so again, like at no point would a report surprise me, like stun me. That's like Matthew Stafford is receiving medical advice that maybe he shouldn't keep playing football. And so like they're pretty frail in terms of their tentpole guys, right? The Kupp, Stafford, and McVay, like. I can see, Kupp was a guy I talked about at the trade deadline, on draft day. Like, they kind of know the score there in terms of their tentpole guys are all getting older and might not be long for the team. So the Rams feel a little bit frail in that regard. The Niners will be good so long as Kyle Shanahan is head coach, right?
Okay.
I did. Kyle,
you're still a Shanahan believer.
The Niners fans are so spoiled, dude. Like they lose 2 games. Like, do we fire Kyle Shanahan? Like, you don't know what it's like out here. Remember the Twitter thread that was like, you don't want, like when Del Curry was divorcing his wife, and it was like, you don't want to be out here, Del. Like this isn't like what you remember it was like. Niners fans, you don't like
Pastor Solomon, man.
Right. You hired Kyle in 2017. All right. Last time you did a head coaching thing was 7 years ago, and like. You had the Jim Tom Sula moment, but before that it was Jim Harbaugh, right? It's been a long time since you did the like Bears carousel. We hire a coach every 3 years because this is actually a lot more of a crapshoot than we wish it was, right? This is that. And remember, John Lynch is Kyle's guy at GM, and so if Kyle were to go, I'm not sure the GM would stay. So you don't want to be out here as much as you think you want to be out here, 49ers fans. Kyle Shanahan is still one of the best coaches, period, head coach, offensive coordinator, play designer, whatever you want to call him, in all of football. Sometimes the receiver you pay goes down, and the running back you traded for has double Achilles tendonitis, and the quarterback that you're about to pay is the 16th best quarterback in football, and your offensive line's not as good as Trent Williams is old, and this happens. Like, this is welcome to the NFL. Kyle won like 6 games 2 years ago. Why is our memory so short? The NFL is hard to win. Just because you have an elite coach doesn't mean you print 13 wins every single year. It does if you have Patrick Mahomes. Everybody else doesn't count.
You don't get a sense that offense is getting stale.
No. In fact, I would argue that if anything, Kyle is like too deep in his bag. Like Kyle is like refusing to play the greatest hits because of his insistence on making Brock into like a big boy adult who can like do Matthew Stafford drop back stuff the way that Stafford kind of evolved that Rams offense.
Sure.
Like they are, like they are really trying to keep the training wheels off the offense for Brock. And I think he's largely responding positively to that. There's 4 to 6 plays a game where I'm like, okay, like this is the problem with having a guy who's a little bit smaller. He doesn't have the biggest arm, and sometimes he gets happy feet in the pocket, and he scrambles too early. And like, I think if ownership, if the York family came to Kyle tomorrow and said, like, if you don't win next week against the Packers, you are fired, I think Kyle would walk out with 55% under center rate, and they would run 40% play action, and they would just hit Debo in the middle of the field behind line of scrimmage 19 times, and they would win the game. But they're trying to grow this offense into something. So there's a little bit of like the growing pains of that. I do not think the offense is stale whatsoever.
Okay. I love that take. I love the conviction behind that take. I'm getting the sense you feel like the offense is getting stale. Well, I'm not sure. And that's why I asked. I didn't come into that question with a strong opinion so much as we are just from a pure points per game standpoint, seeing a team that is used to scoring 30 plus struggling to get much above 20 in most of their games. And so I was curious how much of that is a talent issue, how much of it's
like
an evolution.
The number one thing is just they went from like number 1 touchdown team in terms of red zone drives ending in touchdowns. Now they're like bottom 5. And I don't know how much of that is McCaffrey. I don't know how much of that is the line. I think some of that is Brock. But that's been the big thing is they're moving the ball between the 20s. They get inside the 20 and they lost some that they had last year. My guess is that it McCaffrey scored 21 touchdowns last year. I'm not reinventing the wheel here. I think it was McCaffrey that was a big thing for them last year. That's really hurting them this year.
Yeah, I'm fond of saying that every Brock Purdy win-loss stat you want to throw out there is also a Christian McCaffrey win-loss stat, because he showed up at the same time and completely transformed that offense, as one of the greatest weapons in modern NFL will do for you. That's why you trade what they traded for him. I think the big question hanging over the 49ers head, at least for me, is who are the casualties to the upcoming Brock Purdy extension? And I'm asking this assuming a Brock Purdy extension in the $50+ million range is coming. Now, if you feel differently about that, by all means, let me know. But the types of quarterbacks who are getting that money, I think, are in the same range as Brock Purdy. And I don't think Kyle Shanahan wants to start over there. I could be wrong, but they just extended Bosa and Kittle and Williams and Ayuk and Warner and Lenore. Like, they've thrown out a lot of money recently. Is there room for Brock Purdy and keeping the band together, or some cuts going to have to be made?
Yeah, I think it's nowhere near Saints territory, but they're getting near the point where they're kind of like,
near Saints territory.
Yeah, but they are definitely like, getting more to the point where they're like, okay, we can't afford to lose anybody because we're just so desperate to extend this window. And like, rightfully so. They've been to 2 Super Bowls in the last 5 years. That's very hard to do. Like, it's obviously, they didn't win any of them. And Mahomes has won the last 2. And like, the Chiefs skew our perspective on it. It's hard to do what the Niners have done in terms of how consistently they've made the NFC Championship game and the Super Bowl. So they rightfully are trying to keep the band together. I do think
Brady and Mahomes broke sports discourse over the last 20 years.
It's the same way that all the rookie quarterbacks are bad because CJ Stroud, right? It's like, no, Stroud is just so good.
Who is struggling, right? Yeah.
Right. That we just forgot how this works. So I do think, I think Brock's going to be a $55 million a year guy. I think that like he's going to be the Tua deal plus a little bit. And they absolutely can make that work for their current space. But like, eventually they're going to eat the dead cap hit on Trent Williams, who's 36, and they've been pushing his money to void years. And they had to give him an extension this year because he's holding out from camp. But like, that's coming down the mountain in probably the next couple of years, right? I mean, Mike McGlinchey, who far be it for me to say Mike McGlinchey was this like lockdown right tackle, but he left the building because they couldn't give him that market-setting deal that he wanted. And now they're living in a Colton McKivitz world. And sometimes in the Colton McKivitz world, you really wish you were back in the Mike McGlinchey world. Right. Defensive line, right? Where, obviously they make the Javon Hargrave acquisition, but they move on from Eric Armstead. Their rotation of guys now, like they used to be such a good 2-deep line. They're not what they used to be, right? Now it's Leonard Floyd and Turgros Matos and it's Kalia Davis. And like they're kind of trying to work in the margins on that more so, right? We don't know what Dre Greenlaw is going to look like when he comes back from injury. And if that is going to be a player that they want to extend, if he's back at his athleticism. And so, this is what happens. Attrition accumulates and it's slow and it's quiet and you don't see it and you push money into void years. And then eventually at some point a hammer falls and it all collects back onto you. And so they're extending the window and they're right to extend the window. They'll extend Brock. And
sure.
I think they're right to extend Brock too. But it'll loom, right? It'll be a cloud that looms over them for a little bit, and the hope is that they get a Lombardi for their trouble.
It just feels
their hope
so.
Is, maybe not this podcast hope, but their general hope is.
Man. Look, I'm a football fan first. It does remind me, though, a lot of just like kind of emotionally, and I think a lot of the cap stuff lines up, even though obviously the cap has ballooned a great deal in the last 10 years. It reminds me a lot of the 2015, 2016 Seahawks coming off of back-to-back Super Bowls and a crushing Super Bowl loss. And you did that with a lot of guys overperforming rookie contracts and smaller free agent contracts. All of a sudden, you have to pay Russell Wilson top of the market and Marshawn Lynch top of the market. And you have to pay Bobby Wagner and Michael Bennett and Cliff Averill and Earl Thomas, and Cam Chancellor and Richard Sherman and on and on. And all. You find a way to do that because you're going to let those guys walk out of the building, but it doesn't leave you a whole lot of margin for error. And when you're rolling out 15 plus studs, like true studs on both sides of the ball every week for 3 or 4 years, it doesn't leave a lot of opportunity for rookies or lower end free agents to come in and win starting spots. Yeah. So when those guys leave, you really are left with holes there. And Seattle fought the good fight for as long as they could. And at some point, injuries and cap casualties leave you with these holes. And holy shit, we haven't developed a safety in 6 years. Here comes Tedrick Thompson or Delano Hill. Like, good fucking luck. So I'm curious if the 49ers find themselves on that track or not.
Well, I watched the Malik Mustafa film, and I told you they're developing a safety, no problem over there.
Dude,
yeah,
that boy can play,
D. Winters
man.
picked up DK Metcalf like 25 yards down the field. They're developing a linebacker too. I tell you, John Lynch, man, he knows how to find him on defense. He's something.
He does. And you know what? Just before we get out of the NFC West here, I do want to point out how much I admire the soft landing that Les Snead seems to have been able to find after a half decade of punting all of his first round picks and a lot of his second round picks to find, and kicking the card down the road, making the minimum payment on the credit card and carrying the balance. And all when it was supposed to finally come due and they lose Aaron Donald and they got a million rookies everywhere last year, he goes out and here comes Jared Verse, here comes Braden Fisk. Like, man, I feel like Les Snead's got it going on.
Yeah, listen, if you want to be a GM who, right, like, pushes a winning window and then all of a sudden invests in youth when the tides turn, best way to pick good players, have good coaches. Because then they develop those players real nice, and that's the secret of.
It's a great call.
Yeah, I mean, like that's why does it work for Les Snead to just they're constantly playing more rookies, more snaps than anybody else is, because obviously the defensive side of the ball is not Sean's side of the ball, but still Sean is a good coach. They think smart about development. They understand how to put players in a position to succeed. There's cross pollination for those McVay, Shanahan guys on both sides of the ball, and the same thing is true of Kyle. Right now, Lynch, I think Lynch is a little bit different than Snead because Lynch obviously has the playing background and just all these safeties. Think about Talanoa Hufanga, think about Malik Mustafa, even the secondary guys. You think about Diamador Lenore, now D. Winters. Like every guy that John Lynch finds in the back seven plays with his hair on fire. He's totally nuts and he's really fast. And you're like, all right, that's John Lynch. Like I see the impact there.
I was going to say it's almost like John Lynch did that for 12 years.
Yeah. So it is true that. Okay, at some point you have to take your lumps and play your rookies, but you can short circuit that, or I should say you can shortcut that if you have really good development on your staff. And I think that those young coaches and Kyle and Sean really know how to prioritize that.
One of the takes I've been trying on for size this season that I think fits is the biggest market inefficiency in the NFL economic ecosystem is coaching. When you see like what the 14th best guard in the NFL gets on the free agent market, it's 20-something million a year. And then you look at what the best head coaches are being paid and what the best coordinators are being paid. And to your point, how big of an effect that can have on the, success of your draft class. We put it all on the GM for their ability to identify a player who's going to make it in the NFL. But man, lots of good players don't make it in the NFL because they aren't coached. Mike Tomlin is huge on this, right? He wants guys that need coaching because he trusts his ability to coach them up to an NFL level. And when you have a coach like that, it just, the ripple effects are felt throughout.
Yeah. You anybody wondering why the Steelers are 8-2? Anybody wondering who's making that happen? Anybody wondering why the Chiefs are 9-1 despite the fact that the offense can't do anything because of the wide receiver situation? I tell you, these good coaches, they know how to win these ball games.
It's unbelievable, man. And look, I am loath to focus the sun through a magnifying glass on just the ops here. I want to do the same thing with the Seahawks. And last week we had Greg Rosenthal on and I asked him to rank the following people on the worry meter. And, and the framing for that, because framing is important, wasn't just, how worried are you about this? But assuming 2024 is a figure it out year, and the goal is to try and win the division in 2025 and by 2026 really be contending to make a Super Bowl. How big of an impact do you think the following people are going to be on that? And how confident are you going to be in them being there? I'll start at the top with Mike McDonald. What are your feelings 10 games in?
So I got 1 to 10. 10 is the most worried. 1 is least worried.
Sure. Yeah. We'll keep the same worry meter going.
Okay. Yeah. 3. Right. I think that I understand the frustration with games where the defense performs poorly from a defensive head coach that they lose because the defense has been bad. But in general, right, they didn't make a ton of, let's go bring in 4 dudes who are all ex-Ravens sort of moves or whatever, right? Like the only real substantial new guys they brought in defensively were the 2 linebackers. I think it's pretty clear that those aren't exactly the linebackers that Mike wanted for that defense and how he envisioned them playing. And so in general, I think that Mike's doing sharp stuff. I think that he understands where the bread is buttered on that defense. He's putting Witherspoon in the right positions. He's using Byron Murphy in the right ways, right? Like they're using their stars, I think, in the correct approach. They're not just copy pasting the Ravens stuff. Like I think he gets it. I am interested to see, as this staff grows, what continues to change. Because you bring Grubb in from college, you bring Dirty in from the Quinn system, right, from Dallas. Like McDonald's very clearly like a cross-pollinate guy. He wants to get a lot of ideas from a lot of different spots, and that's cool. But eventually, you got to pick something, and you got to get real good at it. And that bill comes due in 2025. So I'm interested to see how they continue to sharpen this year and into next year.
Yeah, and to your point about wanting to get a lot of voices and then make a decision, I do think one of the more under the radar moves that was made in Seattle's offseason was Mike Macdonald bringing in his professional mentor, Leslie Frazier, to essentially be assistant head coach, a guy who has been through it, who's done the coordinator to head coach thing, and who had some success and who had some failure, and really be able to coach him up on the CEO aspect of being a head coach. I thought that was a really great move. You also mentioned Ryan Grubb. He's the next one. I'm going to say this not in an effort to shade your answer one way or the other, because I know you're detached from this, and I appreciate your honesty. My feeling is when you've got I think a bottom 5 offensive line in the NFL, it does take pages out of your playbook, and so much of coordinating, especially on offense, is chess, right? You're not just making moves to get a first down or a touchdown on this play. You're setting things up for later. And it's tough when you can't run all your setup plays, or you don't have the time to throw the uppercut, right? And you're just left throwing jabs all game long. So all that in mind, your thoughts on Ryan Grubb, the system that he's brought in, his ability to implement it so far?
Yeah. I'm definitely more worried about Grubb than I am about McDonald. I'm generally very suspicious of college coaches who jump to the NFL because just the geometry, it feels like it should be the same sport. 11 guys in the field, 100 yards that way. It's different in terms of the space you have on the field, in terms of NFL athletes. Like there's just so much
hash marks are different.
Yeah, there's so much stuff that's bread and butter at college you just cannot do in the NFL. Like, we'll run zone and we'll tag it with this and we'll get 5 yards a pop. And you get 3 yards a pop in the NFL, right? And that 2 yards is a big difference. And so I'm generally suspicious of the college guys. And I think that Grubb's got just like, he's got a Cheesecake Factory menu, man. He's got so many cool things that they can do, but none of it's connected. None of it makes any sense. There's no holistic, like in this, we are this team on first down and we run this to set up that. It's just like all cool designery stuff, right? Like he's just walking out with like middle screens against the Niners. He's like, this is what's going to work for us this week. And we'll solve next problem. So there's a chance that he's a guy's putting out a lot of fires, like you talk about dealing with that offensive line, and has a vision for this team that will be better manifested when just the personnel on the offensive line allows them to run a more base offense, a more holistic offense. There's also a chance that he's a guy who's got a lot of cool ideas on a chalkboard, but doesn't really have all the punches and the counter punches. You kind of brought up, right, that metaphor, the uppercuts, right? I talk about having all the clubs in the bag, having all the arrows in the quiver. Like you just need such a deep understanding of what you want to be as an offense, how to put stresses on defenses, that you can't just be like a cool 3rd and 6 design guy in the NFL. You can't do that consistently, at least. And so I'm dubious, but I'm not panicked, because I think that, the offensive line makes it really murky. And so there's a lot of worlds where Grubb is better than he seems, and he's just working around a real tough limitation on the offense at this time.
You started the show by really lauding the Seahawks offense and saying that, you're bullish on this team because of the offense. You're skeptical of Grubb. Would you say that you credit your opinion of Seattle's offense more to talent than to scheme?
100%. I think Geno is so good. I think that DK.
Well, he's next on the list, so go there.
So I think Geno's so good. I think that Geno, he had that big 3rd and long conversion to DK where he threw it over Isaac Yiadom on the left sideline.
Oh my God! What a layered throw!
Well, and that's also like not real, because that's supposed to be just like, it was 3rd and 12. It's supposed to be like a 14-yard outbreaking route. And I'm sitting on it. Like the Niners correctly predicted the call.
They were ready.
And they're reading it. And before DK even breaks, DK's not in his break yet. It's not like he got posted up and Geno was like, I have an idea. I'll throw this over the top. Before that even happened, because there's pressure coming, Geno just goes, all right, the only shot we have of a conversion is if I put this high enough, far enough, and DK sees that and figures that out fast enough that we win this as a post-up over the rim. And he just uncorks it. That Geno, there are a lot of quarterbacks in the league who play for completions, and they play to not be the problem on any given play, and they execute it as written, and then they get mad when their receiver doesn't do X, Y, and Z, and they're trying to just not be the problem. And Geno does not care if he looks like a moron on 5 plays. If the best shot they have of converting at 3rd and 12 is this 10% shot to DK, I will throw it. And if it looks like I sailed him by 5 yards and I'm an idiot, I don't care what the media thinks. I don't care about the tweets. Like, this is our chance to move the sticks. That's what I'm here to do. So he's like the anti-Derek Carr. He wants to make the play that wins the game. And sometimes that looks really bad, and sometimes it's a terrible sack and a horrible pick, but sometimes it's right. It's the scramble to the front pylon with 18 seconds left against the 49ers in their home barn, right? Like Geno is a playmaker who is not like the Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, like, oh, look at these highlights. No, he's a playmaker in like from the pocket sense, with boldness sense, with making it like a difficult throw sense. Like he is an OG in terms of how he plays the quarterback position. He's very, very good at what he does.
He feels like a more polished, more experienced version of Jordan Love to me.
Geno does things that remind me of what Phillip Rivers used to do, which is not a fair comparison, and like the throwing style is different.
Stylistically differently, but mindset.
Right. When Phillip decided, like, all right, time to make plays that win games, like Geno and Phillip both have that same feeling where you're like, oh, okay, here we go. It's heavy metal.
You can like feel it when you're watching the game. You can like feel him getting his bag.
Again, there are absolutely games where Geno does that and he goes horribly wrong, but he's willing to take those risks. That's what the team needs. I think that's excellent.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons, and it just kills me, and I've gotten so beaten down by this and writing about this team every week, but it just kills me that Geno is such a divisive player among Seahawks fans. Like, this is the quarterback you hope steps in for Russell Wilson when you trade him, and I wasn't anticipating that from Geno. I'm a convert,
not at all,
But like what we're seeing, at some point, you just got to look at a 3-year body of evidence and say, yeah, this guy's fucking good at football. Like, let's roll with that. So that's my thought. So to put a bow on the Geno part of this question, if you're the Seahawks, are you extending him?
Yeah, what's his contract right now? I don't even know where he's at.
Yeah, no worries. So he is technically under contract next year. I think he's 3 years, $105 million right now.
Cap for $38.5 next year at 35 years old. I mean,
I'm assuming it's like 135 with 100 guaranteed to keep him.
Yeah, I mean, like 38.5 is a nice cap hit for a player of Geno's caliber, right? You're paying him Baker Mayfield money, and he's 2x Baker Mayfield. So that's I would love to keep that 2025 cap hit, if at all possible. Yeah, I mean,
he's definitely made it clear that he's looking for more than 38.5 next year.
Which if I were in Geno's camp, I would be making that very clear as well. He's 35, and so yeah, like if you add more to this year and probably add like 2 more years, take him to 37. That's where I would want to go. It sucks because his career was such a late bloom, and we all know the Giants and the Jets stories to this point, but the fact that he is 35 means that like you don't want to be putting 2028 money into his deal, just because like quarterbacks can play into late 30s and be well, but when the age cliff comes, it comes fast, right? On that, not on the on the game-winning scramble, he hit 19 miles per hour. Like he was moving, and like Geno scramble's been a killer thing for 2022.
He hit 21. He hit 21 on a touchdown run earlier this year. Yeah,
but eventually at some point that'll start to go. And so I would feel fine extending him. It's just you got to be careful about the years you put on it.
Sure. Yeah. But you're not like, hey, we gotta get rid of Geno and draft a guy in the first round next year.
No, I do think that the Drew Lock, Sam Howell thing is smart. Like I don't dislike them doing that at all. They do it in March, and then for 2 months, manufactured content was Sam Howell, Geno Smith quarterback battle, and then Mike's like, no, like he's good. So that's what you have to be careful of, is just the messaging of it, because people are going to doubt Geno because he's had such this odd career arc in general. But I do think it's the right thing to do, is like, throw the Sam Howell dart, continue to throw darts on guys who started and might be good and whatever. Because your quarterback is 35 and he can go down to injury at any time. But in general, no, Geno for the next few years, you should take to the bank being like a fringe top 10 quarterback.
Love that. The other exasperating thing with covering this team, I can't believe I find myself dying on that. I should just lay down the sword at this point, but is DK Metcalf. To me, there's no doubt that if you move on from DK Metcalf, the effects of that are going to be felt far more than just losing his sterling per target production, right? He's always been a low volume. He's put up high volume stats on low volume opportunity. And this year we're seeing higher volume and we're seeing the best year of his career. I also just look at where safeties are when he's on the field versus where he's not. So like I feel like the gravity of DK Metcalf provides a value that goes beyond just his box score numbers, which are impressive in and of themselves. If you're trying to win 2026 and beyond, 2025, 2026 and beyond, is DK Metcalf a part of this if you're the Seahawks?
I think so. You're in no way, shape, or form equipped to move on from him, right? Like what the Niners looked into doing with Deebo Samuel and what the Rams looked into do with Cooper Kupp was in large part because of Puka Nacua and Brandon Ayuk and the players you have behind him, right? You're in no way, shape, or form, like with Lockett being his age and with JSN kind of having the role he does. Like JSN cannot in any way, shape, or form affect the game the way that DK does. And so first, you're just not equipped yet to move on from the guy. Secondly, like I as a film guy, like I share many of the frustrations that other people have with DK because DK like does stuff at the catch point that's annoying and does stuff in his routes that's annoying. And like, oh, you know, I did the big video on the interception in the first Niners game where DK just like took his route upfield because he felt spiritually like that was the decision to make. Like, you can't. There's stuff that he does that's very frustrating on film. With that said, like when DK came out and he was 6'3", 225, running a 4.33, and he gets drafted outside the top 50. And it was because everybody was like, well, like he does stuff as a receiver on film you're not supposed to do, and his catch technique's not great, and he makes these knucklehead plays. And then it turns out that 6'3", 225, 4.33 is 6'3", 225, 4.33. Like you could just be really...
And he's progressed a lot as like a professional receiver.
And that's the funny thing, right? Is we are now what 6 years removed from his drafting, 5-6 years, and the frustrations are the same. I definitely agree he's gotten better. But, look at this route that he, made this mistake. He rounded this break. Like, he should have caught the football this direction.
Totally.
But then you see him on the field and you see how much better the offense is, and you remember that 6'3", 225, 4.33 is 6'3", 225, 4.33. When you have just a guy who's always remember that Cowboys touchdown he scored in primetime last year. When you have a guy who can just do that at any time, it dramatically trickles down the rest of your offense. So he's a valuable player, and he still is. I don't think they're wrong to, like the Seahawks are, I don't think they're wrong as a team to try to load up with wide receivers behind DK and wonder what DK is going to look like at 28 and 29 at 30, because so much of his success is predicated on athleticism. But I also don't think they need to be hopping off that ship anytime soon. That's not an urgent need versus like Debo's really bad. Like Debo gets banged up a lot and plays a very physical style of ball. Cooper Kupp is 31. Like those movements were a little bit more urgent. DK is more like, all right, this is something we have to be aware of as he gets older.
He's 26, man.
Yeah, he's still got a few years of being the guy for you.
Yeah, it would just kill me to see the 3 or 4 years that are left of his prime on another team so that Seattle can, save $20 million.
Yeah.
which teams are notoriously terrible at turning into, recreating DK Metcalf in the aggregate is not something that's likely to happen.
You cannot do it. And also critically, like if you promise me the next 2 to 3 years that Ryan Grubb is the OC and they're largely doing the stuff that they're doing right now, you can't. You
just can't.
Yeah, because you're just so spread and you're so like gun spread drop back oriented that you need a dude who is a walking explosive play. If your like base offense is not going to be about manufacturing,
alpha.
Yeah. You need that guy.
Yep. So we gave a lot of credit earlier to Les Snead and to John Schneider, and without mentioning his name, talked about the build that Monty Ossenfort has done in Arizona. Thoughts on John Schneider now that we're 15 years into this thing?
I mean, yeah, like it'd be cool if the Seahawks had a line at some point, right? I definitely think that the linebacking snafu of Tyrell Dodson and Jerome Baker is very notable in terms of Schneider obviously like worked with Pete Carroll for a very, very, very long time. And when you have that level of interconnectivity between a head coach and a general manager, it becomes a lot easier to kind of get the guys that work for the system. And okay, we know how to make this body type work, and we get a 5th rounder as this trait, we can use him in this way. And then you introduce McDonald, and it's like, all right, like John went and got 2 linebackers for this defense, and immediately Mike was like, yeah, this does not work for what I asked for my linebackers to do. To me, that's pretty eye popping. And I think that they drafted Charles Cross, they drafted Abe Lucas, like they've made some investment, but still the state of the offensive line I think is also a bit of a referendum on Schneider. And so yeah, like all evaluating general managers is all just like, what are your last 3 drafts, right? Like we don't actually know what we're doing on the outside looking at these guys at all. And so Schneider gets his big flowers for the great drafts they had in the early 2010s, and he had a couple nice ones there in the late 2010s and early 2000s as well. He's great at finding 5th round guys who have elite athletic traits, but in general, like there are some pretty substantial holes in this Seahawks roster that I think squarely fall on John.
Yeah, and he had some big hits in free agency early on as well. Averill and Bennett at really cheap deals, kind of identifying, or at least in hindsight, you can give him credit for identifying a ceiling that wasn't apparent on film when he signed them. He's done a few of those, but I think that, he obviously had that 2010 through 2012 draft stretch to start his career that, in terms of just an AAV standpoint, like just value above a replacement player, unbelievable for what, your average is picking at all of these slots. He crushed those drafts, and then he sucked for 5 years with the drafts. And I think he's been mostly good since then, but he's kind of been trading in on that reputation for a long time. It's the free agency stuff that is frustrating because he is a staunch non-first wave guy. And I think there's philosophical backing for that. I'm not going to pay top of the market money for players that teams who know these guys don't want to pay top of the money market for, but you have to hit on second and third wave. And he lit last year's free agency budget on fire. Like they're Pharaoh Brown, Tyrell Dodson, Jerome Baker. Like these guys are not contributing at all. Like they're zeros. They're absolute zeros. And he didn't fix the offensive line. Connor Williams retired. Like it's been pretty bad. I would say of all of these, Schneider is the guy that's on the hottest seat for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you sit down and you do your end of year autopsy in Seattle, whether it comes at the end of the regular season or before or after or whatever, and if you're at a point where like Mike and Schneider are not seeing eye to eye on the team, you invested in Mike. Like Mike's the recent investment that you made, and like Schneider's been there for a long time. He's won the Super Bowls there. He's it's good to have long tenured general managers. I think that like you want those guys to have large samples, but if he and the new head coach like can't figure it out, then you probably have to make a move there, just so that way you can see if Mike will actually be successful as the head coach, which is an unfortunate reality, but it kind of is the reality of things. The first wave thing is also like everything in the NFL is like you need to have exceptions that prove rules. I have nothing wrong with having a rule of not being a first wave guy until you remember that like you will just simply never get a good offensive lineman in the second wave of free agency.
That's right.
Like it's the one position. Like I think you can get contributors at wide receiver and contributors at cornerback. And like that's a spot where like a lot of guys can rotate, but like you're just never ever going to get a high impact offensive lineman outside of round one of free agency. Because when those guys hit the market, it's not common that offensive linemen do, but when they hit the market, they get swept up immediately. And like that's been the problem for Schneider. So you need an exception to prove a rule.
Yeah, every single year there are 30 teams who are unhappy with their offensive line, right? There just aren't enough good offensive linemen to go around. There aren't 150 of them available to fill out everybody's offensive line. Like great if you're the Lions, but that's not most teams. And sometimes you just have to quote unquote overspend to make sure that that's not a massive deficiency that's derailing everything else that you're trying to do. All right. So talked a lot about Seahawks, talked a lot about the NFC West, red meat for the fans. This is selfish for me. I want to talk a little NFL before we get out of here. And I want to do a little contender pretender with you. There are 6 teams right now with 8+ wins. And I'm going to start at the bottom, work my way up. And I just want to get your thoughts on how dangerous these teams are, how deep you see them going. I'm going to start with the Vikings.
Pretender. I think that when they were 5-0, I was calling them pretenders. Like I think that we kind of know what Sam Darnold is. We know what he isn't. They've added T.J. Hawkinson and Jordan Addison back to that offense, and so they have a ton of weapons. They can win a game at the drop of a hat, especially with that defense. But also, like, we all loved on Flores for the first month of the season. They're making like Stephon Gilmore work at corner, right? Like talent-wise, the Vikings are not a Super Bowl roster. They're a good roster, and they're being coached really, really well. But eventually, they're going to run to a team that just out-talents them 11 on 11 for 4 quarters. And so, pretender to me. Yeah,
I'm kind of there. I'm kind of there with you. I think they're better than that team that started out 13-1 or 13-2, whatever it was, a couple years ago, and then lost to the Giants in the first round of the playoffs. I do think that they're better top to bottom than that. I'm a big KOC guy. I think Kevin O'Connell he's starting to really get the recognition that I think he deserves. But I'm with you. When it's January and you just got to go be tougher than the team across from you for 60 minutes, I don't think they're built for it. Next team is the Steelers.
Sure, like whatever. They win games. Like, isn't that the whole point? I don't like. They've
won 2 games with 6 field goals and no touchdowns this year.
Here's what the reality of it is. If you gave me just this Steelers team in a vacuum and asked me contender, pretender, I would say pretender. Yep. But in the context of the last few Steelers teams, all of which were pretenders. This Steelers team is clearly better. Like the defense is better on like a down-to-down basis. They're not as turnover reliant. They have better depth. And then the offense is clearly better. It's better with Fields and it's better with Russell Wilson. Still not a great offense, but it's been better with both of those quarterbacks. So I feel like I'm compelled to call them contenders just because I called the old teams pretenders and they're definitely better now. But in a vacuum, they're probably still below the bar. I think they're
feels
contenders.
Like they're straddling the line a little bit.
I feel like they're contenders because I feel like Mike Tomlin is a witch, and that's my answer.
Yeah, man. Yeah. That dude is just the best. Favorite coach in the league. All right. Next, a team in the NFC East that I'm not sure you've spent too much time thinking about. We got the Philadelphia Eagles.
Go Birds. They are contenders because the talent is elite. In the same way that, like, I think the Cardinals make you outcoach them. I think the Eagles can get outcoached and get out situationed, right? We've seen them be bad in late game scenarios. They've been bad execution on fourth downs. I think Jalen Hurts is a weak point for this team. And so, like, if they and the Lions played, if they and the Lions played on a neutral field, the Lions would be like 4-point favorites coming into that game. Like the Lions are definitely better, but AJ Brown goes burr, Saquon Barkley go burr, right? They just have dudes, and they have such good dudes that they can beat anybody anytime. So contenders.
Wild to me that the best collegiate receiver that I've ever watched is like the third or fourth option on that offense.
Yeah,
in Devonta Smith. Like that, they got the dudes. I am a big Jalen Hurts guy, and I know that he's limited as a passer, doesn't throw over the middle of the field, doesn't process as quick as the elite guys. I think he makes up for it in a lot of other ways, but I'm not as close to that fire as you are. You're not so much a Hurts guy.
No, he's better against the blitz this season. It's also like when they lose games, it's because he has 3 of the worst turnovers you've ever seen. Like we've seen that a lot now, and so he's the weak point of the team. He's a pretty good quarterback, but this offensive line, this wide receiver room, this running back, I know what the weak point of the offense is. It's the quarterback for sure.
Geno Smith or Jalen Hurts?
Geno, for sure.
Okay. The Bills made the most noise this past week. They're now 8-2? After knocking off the Chiefs, where are they at?
Contender for sure. It's not the same old Bills team because they're a little bit more variable on defense, and then offensively they have a bit of a different approach. This is the best line.
Far more balanced on offense with Joe Brady.
This is the best line and running game that they will bring into the playoffs, which I think can be a big deal in January football. And we all know what a Josh Allen takeover game looks like, and we've seen it before. And so contenders for sure. Very good team.
Yeah, God, they are fucking awesome to watch. They remind me a lot of in a different way, but in terms of like almost the inevitability that you feel, they remind me of the 49ers where they haven't gotten over the top, but they remind me of the 49ers last few years where it's just like any given day, they are the best team in the NFL.
Yeah. It's so hard to keep getting up off the mat. It's so challenging to keep it. All right, but we got to, we can do it this year. We can do it this year. Beating the Chiefs is a nice bump to Santa going to the postseason, right? They obviously lost that big game to the Ravens.
4 times in a row in the regular season.
Yeah, but still, it's nice to be the team that knocks off the undefeated Chiefs, and now you can say, okay, like we know we can beat them. Let's go do it this year in the postseason.
Speaking of the formerly undefeated Chiefs, I mean, what's it to say?
They're not. They're really annoying, and they're kind of bad.
They're not dominant.
But
they
so long as 15 is the
dominant.
quarterback, they're contenders. I'll believe that they don't win the Super Bowl precisely at the moment which 3 zeros hit the clock in that game. They're contenders.
Exactly. I mean, last year was the worst Chiefs team I've ever seen Patrick Mahomes quarterback, and didn't matter. It just chips down.
Exceptions that prove rules, right? The Chiefs do not look like or smell like a contender at all, but there's an exception that proves the rule, and he wears 15 for the Kansas City Chiefs, so contender.
Yeah. We were really fortunate to have Sean Clement on the show a number of months ago, and he's someone who's worked as a consultant for front offices with the Dolphins and the Ravens, and he talked about with the Chiefs, he's like, the Chiefs have reached a point, he's like, it just blows my mind every time I watch it, where Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes are playing possum all regular season long. Yes, they are trying to win games, but they don't really care about losing to the Bills in the regular season because they're not giving everything that they have. There is a playoffs Chiefs team that is different than the regular season Chiefs team. And to reach a level of talent and confidence in that talent to be able to do that is just remarkable to me.
Yeah. Remember, when this team plays in December, they're going to have Isaiah Pacheco back, and they're going to have both Juju and DeAndre Hopkins on the field, which is not something that we saw for the first time only this past week. And Juju's still coming back from a hamstring, which, like, far be it for me to be like, oh, Juju Smith-Schuster in 2024. But, like, Juju, Hopkins, Kelsey, Xavier Worthy, Isaiah Pacheco, It ain't great, but it's better than a lot of what we've seen from the Chiefs the last 2 years in terms of weapons.
Yeah, I mean, and you just ran down a list of really good players without mentioning Travis Kelce. And then, of course, you got Steve Spagnuolo, who is like the dream defensive coordinator, doesn't appear to have any aspirations to go take a head coaching job anywhere. I'm just going to go to the Hall of Fame as a coordinator and take away your number one. I mean, this is the thing that was Bill Belichick's hallmark during his prime is whatever you do the best on offense, I'm just going to take that away. And if you can beat me with your offhand, I'll tip my cap. Yep. But I'm guessing you're not going to because I have a great quarterback.
Yeah, they've been there before, and they know what it takes to win the games against the Bills and against the Bengals and against the Ravens and against the whomever you show and like the Chargers and the Broncos. They've been down a lot of streets the Chiefs have, and they know they're never out for the count, and that's a big deal in postseason football. They got a lot of resiliency.
Yeah, they sure do. I'm kind of with you. The Chiefs are the favorite until they've actually been eliminated. But god damn, the Detroit Lions.
Yeah, the Lions just have
they're my favorite team in a long time.
They also just have such an easier playoff run, right? Because like the NFC is just so thin in terms of playoff opponents, right? Like Lions might get the 1 seed, and then they play the 6 seed Vikings in their home stadium, who they will have played twice that season, right? They get the 6 seed Packers. They play they're like AFC is so loaded with like great quarterbacks and great defenses, and the NFC is just a lot thinner. And so the Lions get like I think a nicer walk to the play. Got to go through the Eagles, got to go through potential Niners. Like there's some good teams there, but still, this team's extremely good. Like they fall into the same category as the Eagles do, where like I know what the weak point is on the offense. That's probably the quarterback, and that still is like a concerning thing to be when you're a true contender. Goff's obviously played lights out this year and like has improved dramatically over his time there in Detroit. But it's still a guy like he has the Texans game in him, right? Where you can pressure him and you can make him feel the heat in every single drop back, and you can fold that pocket and you can get some erratic throws out of him. So like that's your concern. And then obviously defensively they're dealing with a ton of injury attrition right now, right? Aiden Hutchinson is out until the Super Bowl at the very least. Alex Anzalone, who like they have 3 stars on defense, and it's Aiden Hutchinson, Brian Branch, and Alex Anzalone, their middle linebacker. He's out with a broken forearm. He'll be out for at least the next 6 to 8 weeks, and so there's a chance this defense loses some of its teeth. But still, you expect them to put like 35 on anybody, so they're going to cruise into the NFC postseason, and then it becomes a can anybody hassle Goff situation. And there aren't that many great pass rushers right now in the NFC, and so yeah, like Lions are, Dan Campbell told that team after they lost the NFC Championship game, we may not be back here next year. They're probably going to be back the next year.
It would be stunning. It would be stunning if they're not. And to me, what I love is Dan Campbell in a lot of ways reminds me, and look, I know this is myopic, but I do think there's some accuracy here. Reminds me a lot of early career Pete Carroll. There was a stretch in 2012 where the Seahawks hadn't done it yet, but they went out and they beat the Cardinals 58-0. They beat the Bills 50-13, and they beat the 49ers 42-13 in 3 consecutive games. They ran a fake punt against the Bills up 50-0 in that game. And that's what I'm seeing from the Lions. And I will forever bemoan losing that from Pete Carroll. It felt like Pete Carroll was still at USC trying to convince AP voters that he was the number one team in the country, right? Like, we're up by a lot. We're going to be up by even more. And right now, that's what Dan Campbell and Ben Johnson are doing. Like, they're running trick plays up 40. They're winging the ball around. They're treating every single drive like it's tied. And I just love that mindset. And I got to think that players love that mindset as well.
Yeah, they like losing Hutchinson and losing Anzalone is objectively a very big deal, but also like they still hold a lot of scrappy underdog Lions within them, right? Like they've acknowledged their point as contenders, and they have a target on their backs every single week, and they know they get the best out of every team, but they also still have a lot of like, oh, you guys doubt us to them. That can be very valuable in a postseason run, right? And some of these enormous wins over the Cowboys and the Titans and the Jaguars help make you feel a little bit like, this is what we do. Like we embarrass teams. Like we show up and we kick in doors, and like we've got some badassery to us. They're fun to watch.
Yep. So I gave you 6 teams that have at least 8 wins. I'm gonna list off, and this is me cherry picking a little bit, who I think there's a half dozen other teams that haven't won 8 games yet that I think could be contenders. I just want, you don't have to go into all of these, but tell me who of this group you think is the most likely to break into that top tier. We've got the Chargers, Packers, Texans, Ravens, and I'm still going to throw the Niners in there.
Ravens for sure. I think the Ravens are still one of the
I think they're
3 or
so
4
good,
best teams in football. I think
just stupid losses, man. Just the stupidest, dumbest losses this year. Cowboys, Raiders, Browns. Come on.
Yeah, they. I'm very confident in the Ravens making a postseason run. I think that pass defense has been prohibitively bad through the first 11 weeks of the season, and they just got to get it to decently mid. And I think that they have enough young players and enough ascending players to do so. And so I still have a lot of faith in the Ravens. And then, not the Chargers. The Packers I'm very suspicious of. I just don't think that defense has a ton of talent. They don't have a pass rush. They're super turnover reliant. I'm pretty suspicious of them.
Texans with Nico Collins.
Texans was the one I was thinking of. The Texans are not an optimized team in terms of coaching. They're a team that's got some offensive line problems. But man, if you want to win a postseason game, you bring a pass rush and an elite quarterback, and you can get there. And I know Stroud's had some bad games, but I think with Nico back on the field, I think that you're going to see a lot more of the 2023 Stroud that we saw. And so to me, I don't put the Texans up in that top AFC tier, and they're certainly capable of losing to the Chargers, losing to the Steelers. They're far from a perfect team, but you get Daniel Hunter, Will Anderson, Nico Collins, and CJ Stroud on the field at the same time, you can beat just about anybody in football. So Texans, I take a little seriously.
Niners, are they a threat?
No, Niners are not a great team this year. Defense was always going to take a step back. It's been a pretty big step back, and they're dealing with big injuries on offense. They make it. They don't scare me when they make it.
Last question for you. Going into this past week, Lamar Jackson was the prohibitive MVP favorite. That line has moved dramatically in favor of Josh Allen. Right now, who are you voting for MVP, and has that opinion changed in the last 7 days?
Lamar and no. I think Josh has been close the whole time. I think Josh is still really close. I think I had to submit an MVP ballot for a survey at work, and I think that you can make a case for 4 guys to be it with
Goff
that I would listen to. Not Goff.
Okay.
Goff's got great stats, but I know who butters the bread there in that offense, and that's Ben Johnson. I think you can make it for Lamar. I think you can make it for Josh. I think those leaders in the clubhouse. I think you can still make it for Mahomes, because any other quarterback you put Josh in that offense, Lamar in that offense, I promise you they're a 6-4 team. Mahomes, the third down stuff is absolute nails. So that's a value conversation. Obviously, stats wise, he's not up there. And then the fourth is Saquon. You absolutely unequivocally can make a case. The amount of Eagles games that have been 1-score games until they get to the third and the fourth quarter, and Saquon eventually just starts ripping off big runs.
Great.
He is
so great.
Such an enormous difference maker for that team. It is so evident in the way this offense fell apart in 2023 versus what it is now in 2024, how consistently they can run the football. And it's predicated on his talent, right? That's obviously still a great offensive line, and Jalen Hurts involved in the running game, but there are 10 runs every single game. Saquon gets 25 carries. There are 10 runs every single game where Saquon creates yardage that no other back would be able to create. I mean, he has been integral to that offensive success. And so to me, those are the 4 guys that I hear for the conversation. To me, it's still Lamar, and that's who I'm watching down the stretch.
Yeah, for me, it's Lamar with a bullet. It's not even particularly close, and I'll admit that Josh Allen closed the gap this past week, and we get caught up in wins and losses for sure, especially with quarterbacks. But I mean, Lamar's putting up a historic season.
Yeah,
that didn't.
Lamar's playing better than he did last year.
The numbers are going to be in the conversation for the best quarterback season of all time. And he's just getting undone by his defense. Question for you with Saquon is, do you think that he provides more value to the Eagles than what Derrick Henry has done for the Ravens?
Yes, because Lamar is a much bigger impact on the Ravens running game than Hurts is. The Eagles don't use Hurts as a designed runner nearly as much, nearly as diversely, nearly as crazy as the Ravens do Lamar. Hurts, they would occasionally use him on option stuff, and then he gets a lot of his rushing production as a scrambler, but in terms of the design running game, he's not as dangerous as Lamar, nor as often used as Lamar. And Henry, they use Henry as a pitch, right? Henry is an arrow they have in their bag, and I think some would argue, and I can get there, that they need to make Henry the focal point of the offense, right? They need to get more back to some 20 plus yard carry games for Derrick Henry. He is 30, right? It's a little bit tougher for him to do that. But they kind of use him as a mode, as a style. They deploy him in the Bills game as the feature piece, but then they go with the Steelers. He was not how they wanted to move the football in that game. They were predicating on Lamar. There is no game in the Eagles season which is not start with, all right, so we got to how are we getting Saquon his carries? How are we getting Saquon his touches? What are we running with him? What do we like for him? And then if they get into halftime and it's not been good, they walk in the second half and it's Saquon and it's Saquon and it's Saquon. Like he is the engine for that offense in year one with Jalen Hurts on the team, with AJ Brown on the team. He is the reason the offense goes every single Sunday.
Yeah, I'm a big believer that some running backs matter, and there's no question that Saquon and I believe Derrick Henry are in that conversation with Christian McCaffrey and guys who really transform an offense. The only other name that I would throw in there, and I know he hasn't put up the stats in the last few games, but in terms of pure impact and winning games from non-quarterback position, I'm going to throw TJ Watt into the mix as well.
I think Watt was on my top 10. I just submit 10 names. I had Watt on there. I had Nico Collins way up there. I think that it's pretty clear what this passing game isn't in Houston, is and is not in Houston without Nico Collins. So I had him up there. I had I think Goff just I had him 6. I had Herbert 7, Burrow 8. Like those guys are integral to their teams. It's just
of course,
Herbert
and Burrow have been phenomenal.
Yeah, they've been great.
That was a fun game on Sunday night.
Yeah, Herbert's the one where if they had been as pass happy since week 1 as they've been since they came back from their bye, which was week 5, it was only a 4-week sample, but still, if Herbert didn't have those 4 games, he had 13 pass attempts in those games, he'd have some stupid numbers, and I think there'd be a little bit more volume in terms of what he's doing there as a quarterback. So we'll see, man. They're 7-3. The Chiefs are 9-1. They get another game against the Chiefs. The Herbert train, it's not stuck in the station. There's some worlds where it leaves the station.
Okay. Forgive me. I'm going to ask one more selfish question because I think it's the most interesting storyline in the NFL, or one of them. What are you doing if you're the Colts with Anthony Richardson?
Playing him.
Yeah, thank you. God damn.
Is anybody? The answer's been playing him the whole time. There's never been any point.
You drafted a guy with 13 college starts, number 4 overall. Why are you going to act like this guy needs to be so polished already when he only played 5 games last year?
Keep playing him. Ride the roller coaster. Ride the bumps. It's going to be nice for you in 2026. You're not going to care that you had an embarrassing loss to whoever was they lost to, the Texans, before he got benched. You would in 12 months. It won't matter. You just got to ride the wave of the young player. He'll be all right.
All right. Thank you for humoring me, and for those listening, thank you for humoring me with some broader NFL talk. I know there's a lot of real football fans out there. Listen, Ben, I cannot tell you how much I have looked forward to this show. I know we started talking a few weeks ago about you coming on. Every time we talk, I leave a smarter football fan. Thank you for making the time.
Thank you, Jacson. Appreciate it, dude. You be well. All
right. You as well. And in case anyone out there is unaware, so I know you made a big move professionally this year. Where can the listeners and viewers find more of you?
Yeah, ESPN is the spot. I got 2 columns that come out every single week for ESPN Plus. You can check those out. I'm on Mina Kimes' show featuring Leonard, featuring Ben every other Thursday of the season. And I'm on ESPN Daily every single Monday, recapping the Sunday action at Benjamin Solak on all the socials, except for the ones that I don't have.
All right.
Just look, if I'm not there, I'm not there.
Yeah, appreciate it, man. Thanks again. As always, you can find Mike and I on social media. I am on Twitter and Blue Sky at Jacson Bevins. That's Jacson. Remember that no K is okay when spelling my name. Mike is on Twitter and Blue Sky at Mike Barwin, and the show itself is on both platforms at Cigar Thoughts. You can catch full video episodes on our YouTube channel at Cigar Thoughts. Find the rest of our socials at cigarthoughtsnfl.com. As mentioned previously, this episode is brought to you by Glenfiddich Premium Single Malt Scotch Whiskey. Y'all know I'm a huge fan of their lineup, and we're thrilled to have them on board as a sponsor of the show. One of the great things about a great scotch is how well it plays with a good cigar. So once again, we do have our own special release of cigars that you can purchase at a terrific price as a listener to the show. The release of these Cigar Thought Stogies has been successful enough for us to continue offering them for the low price of $149. That's right, just $149 for a bundle of 10. As many of you know, we partner with one of the most prestigious cigar manufacturers in the world to release these official Cigar Thought cigars, which you can order directly from cigarthoughtsnfl.com. Just follow the link on the show page to get these easy-to-smoke stogies, rolled with 13-year aged premium Dominican tobacco leaf, or hit us up on Twitter, Instagram. We'll send you the details directly. The cigars come with a Boveda humidification pack and a Mylar storage bag to make sure they stay fresh, whether you have a humidor or not. And of course, you can listen to this show and for the rest of this season, read every article at fieldgoals.com. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts and you like the show, drop us a 5-star rating, leave a quick review. I can't stress to you enough how much that helps the show grow. That online feedback is crucial. Really trying to build something here, and we're so grateful for all the support y'all have shown so far. Thank you to all of you listening for your continued support of this show. We know you've only got so much time for podcasts in your life, and it is an honor to be a part of that for y'all. Please know that by sharing this show on social media and with your friends, you give us the juice to keep making this happen. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, onwards and upwards, my friends.